When I got the theme for this talk and this month, that was a very inspiring theme for me to get. But actually, before we sort of get started on the talking part, I thought we'd just let everybody ease into the day with a little bit of music, yeah? So what we had, oh, no, there we go. This little clip was from a concert that was held, I think actually almost 2 years ago now, in a very, very, very tiny living room, like 4 by 5 meters, like 20 square meters, in Sydhavn. And it was a competition that we put out on Lo-Fi, saying we have this amazing band on the platform in the community called Rest in Beats. They just won the Danish P3 radio Karrierekanonen. They're fantastic, but back then they've continuously been fantastic, but they were not as known. Put out, there's this amazing band that we have in the community, and we'd love for them to come out and play for one of you guys. So if you can tell us why you should have this band come play in your living room, we'll come and handle that and deliver that to you. And Lotte, who won the competition, she wrote this beautiful message that she wanted and deserved this because she wanted to give this band and this experience as a gift to her neighbors. She had just moved from recently moved into this apartment block in Sydhavn in southwest Copenhagen, and it's a building from the 30s, and you can hear your neighbors very clearly. You can hear them when they go to the bathroom. You can hear them when they listen to the TV. You can hear them when they're playing music. And she says, I don't really meet them because I don't hang out in the yard a lot, but I can hear them, but I haven't really met them. So I'd love to meet them. I'd love to meet my neighbors and have a conversation with them and perhaps, hopefully, start to share more with them, and I'd love to share this music. And for us, this was like the easiest decision in the world. This, of course, Lotte was the one that had to win this because she wanted to give this gift of music. And it was a very compassionate act of her, right? Here are all these strangers that I don't really know, that I have no other relation to except that I share a space with them and I can hear them, but I might not have anything in common with them on my everyday life or whatever I do, but I have this, we live close together. So that's why I sort of decided, okay, I had to have a clip from this concert here today. There were, in this 20 square meter living room, there was 22 people and the band. Okay, it was amazing. Everybody was very close and personal. And it was very intimate and powerful experience. So compassion. I sort of brushed up a little bit. In Danish, the Danish translation, sort of immediate, if you Google it and Google Translate it, is medlidenhed, which sort of indicates this sort of idea of co-suffering. But in English, the word and the concept is actually much bigger. Okay, it doesn't just mean that we feel that it's not pity, because that's another translation of the Danish word medlidenhed. It's more this idea that I can connect with other people, and not just whatever they're going through that might be difficult, but also all the good stuff that they might be experiencing. It has to do with curiosity, with flexibility, a lot with mindfulness, and perhaps more importantly, to sort of lead our lives in a more sort of sustainable manner, so you can also be compassionate towards yourself. You can treat yourself with kindness, treat others and yourself with kindness, and to sort of have more sustainable selves and have more sustainable lives. So that was a very sort of inspiring thing to sort of kick off. So the more I started thinking about it, the more I realized that actually so many of my choices, if we understand compassion as something that has to do with curiosity, with the interest in other people's inner lives, and with finding ways to not just have compassion, but be compassionate. The more I realized that actually quite a lot of my sort of choices in life, or career choices at least, have sort of ended up with this. I actually have the most useless master's degree you can possibly have. In Denmark, I have a master's degree in comparative literature. It turned out, at least on the face of it, whenever people asked me when I was studying, it was like, so what are you studying for? And I was like, when you study comparative literature, you don't really study for, you don't study to be a lawyer or to be a doctor or to be an engineer. You're just like studying literature. So I was like, well, not really. You couldn't even become a high school teacher back then, because like the Danish, like the Association of like the Danish Danish teachers has sort of put a moratorium on all these competent people to come in and teach Danish literature. So I was like, well, I'm not really studying for anything. And people, my uncle would look at me and think that I was never, I was going to be that was a bad idea. I would have to like end up as a destitute individual. But nevertheless, the thing is that my sort of approach as I work my way through that is that literature is it's a fairly pragmatic approach to literature. There's this sort of high art concept, but then there's also this concept of literature as action, as symbolic action. There's a very smart and wonderful philosopher called Kenneth Burke. He's a pragmatist. And he talks about literature as proverbs writ large. So literature is a way for us to understand the world around us. Proverbs are basically ways of dealing with situations. And now those situations have become obsolete, and now we just sort of often just end up with the proverbs. And we don't really know what they mean anymore, but quite often, and literature does that too, it helps us to figure out and deal with situations that we might not understand or be able to figure out without it. It helps us to understand other people. It helps us to put ourselves in other people's shoes, yes? So that was sort of, okay, so it's like, there's the compassion part. Then I ended up, after my master's, which turned out not to be quite so useless after all, I ended up doing communications for a charity in London, the Disability Foundation. And that was wonderful and important work. And then coming back to Copenhagen, I applied for a PhD, and I got the PhD on jazz and American culture. And as I worked my way through this phenomenon of jazz, I ended up writing a postdoc or working on a postdoc about jazz as what I called it a cosmopolitan vernacular. So jazz is a language that is, on one hand, global. It's the first global art form. And on the other hand, because of the element of improvisation that exists in jazz, it very quickly adopts local musical cultures as well. So it's an international global language, and it's also a sort of very local vernacular language. And cosmopolitanism, rather than, there's like all these like, there was like a fad for a while with all these like words. Glocal was like a word, like, right? So global and local. But cosmopolitanism, again, because cosmopolitanism is not just being out there traveling jet setter with your little suitcase. Cosmopolitanism is actually also an ethical stance, right? It is a stance about kindness towards strangers, and this understanding that not that we're all the same, but that we have that we respect and accept each other's differences, and that is the beautiful part of being human. So yes, jazz is a cosmopolitan vernacular. And then in January 2014, I had this, when you work as an academic, so much of what you do is quite lonely. Even if you do like research projects with other people, so much of your work is lonely. Then you teach, that's also a wonderful part of it. But in January 2014, I had this strange experience of having an academic article that mostly like 10 people will read these things, right? That's like, then you're like, all right, oh, awesome, 10 people read my article. But this one actually went kind of viral. It was an article about this Danish jazz band during the Second World War, during the occupation, that consisted of 3 black guys, 3 Afro-Danes. Yes, there were like black people in Denmark. There's been black people in Denmark back to the 900s. That's another conversation. So 3 Afro-Danes and a Jewish singer, Rachel Rastini, in front. And you're thinking, how is this possible? How can you possibly have this like jazz orchestra playing while the sort of Nazis were goose-stepping out in the streets? But they were a huge success. They were the most successful and most popular jazz orchestra, one of the most popular jazz orchestras. And that story was so strange and so sort of, you know, piqued people's imagination to the point where it got picked up by various news media in Denmark, then suddenly got picked up by the conversation in, then it got picked up by the conversation in UK, which is sort of disseminating science in a popular way in English. And then a blogger in the States picked it up, and it sort of, and suddenly I was contacted by a guy in Tel Aviv who had read the story while sitting on a mountaintop in Japan and wanted to make a movie about this thing. So it was like this weird, how did that happen? But here was this thing again, was this, suddenly there was this thing that all these people read this story about these 3 guys who created this thing, and I was trying to speculate. None of them were alive when I wrote the article, but I met and talked with people who knew them, and that sort of, again, this idea that what we may think about Danish culture being this very sort of homogeneous thing, sort of slightly medium brown, beigey kind of thing that exists in the world, is actually not quite so. And it was a very and it was so much fun that I actually reached people. I was like, oh my God, I want more of that. I want to have like a connection to people outside of academia. Okay, how can I somehow work this into my academic life? At the same time, I was trying to figure out what my next research project should be. There were no tenure positions to have, of course, at Copenhagen University, and I wanted to figure out. And I was thinking about doing a project, a joint European research project on the sustainability of the music business, both the social and the cultural sustainability, but also the very much so the economic sustainability or lack thereof. And I decided that doing €1 million research project for 3 years with a team of 10 researchers and 2 conferences and a book of collection of articles was unambitious. Because if I was very, very good at this so-called knowledge dissemination that is sort of in EU speak, if I really worked hard at that, maybe we would reach 2,000 people. And that wouldn't change anything. It would still leave us with a problem of sustainability in the music industry. So I quit my job and started this thing called lo-fi. So lo-fi is one of the things that I saw when I was trying to read up on this research project I might start was that the value chain in music has sort of broken. On one hand, we have these artists that produce all this amazing music for us, but they don't really make any money. So if you, and I'm not Spotify bashing him, just stating a fact. So per Spotify play, a musician gets half a cent, right? So 1 million plays on Spotify, which really not a lot of people have, will equivalent about a monthly American minimum wage. Live music, massive business, $25 billion on a global revenue every year, but 90% of that goes to the top 5% artists. Right? So it's a very uneven distribution of funds. At the same time, we have this amazing thing, right? So all this amazing music is available right here at our fingertips 24/7. Even if you're like a total sound audiophile like me, who has a Tidal subscription, it's still just 200 kroners every month. And it's amazing. But two things happen. So one, the music industry has worked for a very long time with this commodity-based model, right? Music is an object, it's a commodity that we sell to other people, but for a commodity to be worth anything, it actually has to have some sort of scarcity, right? But music is not scarce anymore. It's here, right, for next to nothing. So that means that this commodity is losing value very, very fast. That's the sort of economic side of it. Then there's the emotional side of it and the side that connects with compassion, that when we have all this music available all the time, we forget what it's worth. It's like turning on the water, and sure, that's free, and so music is free. If you ask most people, can you remember the music that you playlisted or favorited like in the last 3 months? It's a surprisingly small amount of the music that they've listened to or playlisted that they can actually really remember. Again, like there are like total geeks like me, but you know, like your average sort of music listener. So it stops having value for us both in an economic sense, but also in an emotional sense. It sort of runs in the background, it becomes noise. And lo-fi exists, and I'm keeping you in suspense. What is lo-fi? What is this thing she's talking about? Now, lo-fi is a community for intimate, user-generated live music experiences. So like this, in an apartment somewhere in Sydhavn. It could happen here at Founders House, because it felt like this would be a great place to have music and people connect. The point is that it's about sitting down and being present, connecting with the music, with the people that sit next to you. The interesting thing that happens when you put music into a living room and you put strangers who'd like to hear this music into a living room is that they walk around saying hi to each other. You know, not like when you go to a gig and you sort of politely ignore the stranger next to you, or you like non-politely ignore the stranger next to you, but this sort of, oh, okay, here's this person, and we're both here, and we're really close, so we might as well. It's super awkward if we don't say hi. It's kind of awkward when we also say hi, but it's less awkward if we just start talking. Why are you here? How did you hear about this? Do you know the band? All these sort of little micro conversations that happen, that connect people. So we connect people, and we connect people to music, and we make people remember, we remind, and reconnect with the value of music. So that's what we're here for. So trying to create a community that kind of want to sign off on this idea that we could have a fair trade music business. Right? That we could create a music business where the people who actually produce this thing, this amazing, beautiful, powerful communication, are the ones that get paid the most, not the least. So there's this idea of connectedness, because that's another thing. Music, and this is very much sort of a very personal take on music, but music is a way of understanding the world. It would be easy to sort of do the whole universal language metaphor, but I think that's actually I think that's diminishing, because I think music is beyond language, right? It's this thing that can actually talk to us about all the things that we can't talk about with language. Emotions, right, for example. Very deep experiences that we can't really put words on. There's a very beautiful Inuit saying that song is when the spirit gets too large for words. Okay? So it's this thing that connects us to our own deepest emotions and to others, the emotions of others. So music is a very compassion-filled activity, existence in the world. And there's another rather wonderful researcher called Josh Kuhn, who wrote a book about music as audiotopias. So it's a way for us to enter into another human being's mind and existence and understanding and their emotions, and to sort of walk around in their emotional geography for a little while. And it's this sort of connecting with others, that is a very powerful concept. Lastly, again, to move away from this idea of music as a commodity, as an object that we buy and sell. At Lo-Fi, we talk about music. It's not an object, it's a verb. Music is an activity, and it's something that we do together. So let's amplify some togetherness, everybody. Thank you very much.